Psychology in Seattle.
Hello and welcome to Psychology in Seattle. I'm your host, Kirk Honda, licensed therapist. Today I have a special guest with me, Ann Blake, my co-worker at Antioch University. We're both professors in the master's program. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Ann is going to explain Jungian psychology, but first I have a few announcements. Our new website is up and running, so please visit psychologyinseattle.com to check it out. We have a new outtakes video on our homepage, so check that out if you like. It's humorous, shall I say. And of course, please visit our Support Us page if you want. You can send emails to contact@psychologyinseattle.com. That's contact@psychologyinseattle.com. We always love hearing from our listeners. And hey, therapists or other people in the biz, send us your info in a concise email, and maybe we'll give you a shout out. And today's music, of course, is provided by Bread Knife Incident. Also, I wanted to mention that sometimes I get emails from students saying that professors will assign the podcast while they're out of town. You might be able to relate to this. You know, you go on vacation and you need to provide content for your students so that you don't have to meet during the break. And so some professors, I'll hear from students saying, my professor assigned one of your podcasts while I was gone.
That's great.
So along the lines of students in Antioch, I just want to put this out there. The students at Antioch are amazing.
Absolutely.
Every day, I witness students grinding away, working hard to make a difference, exploring the difficult corners of their personality when they don't necessarily have to do that, volunteering their time to help others, dedicating themselves to social justice. All the while, they're paying money to do it. They pay money so they can volunteer their time to help others at their internships, which usually takes over a year of their time. And it's the most grueling job of their entire life. Take it from me. I see it whenever I work with students year round, and they're very stressed out, right? Yeah. They're smart. They're privileged. They could do anything they want. They could become bankers and they could make lots of money. But instead, they chose to be trained as therapists and help the world to make a difference. It's truly noble, in my opinion. And it's humbling for me to witness. And that's why I have dedicated a portion of my career and life to helping them help other people. If I can help them make a difference in the world, then that makes it all worth it, right?
Yep.
Do you find that to be true in your life?
And in fact, Kirk, on their internships, they are working with clients who have oftentimes the most severe disorders and problems.
Right.
And they're brand new at this job, and they are working on the front lines.
Right.
And doing well.
Right. They get the most difficult cases, the most stressful cases. Yeah. If a case came in the door to an agency that was perhaps had more optimism and would be more easily helped and more easily assisted, and the goals would be met more quickly, that case would be given to a more experienced therapist.
That's right. It's really ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And heroic.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. Heroic.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I teach 2 sections of case consultation on Fridays, and I've been doing that for several years, and I realized at the end of the quarter that I start to have a little bit of secondary post-traumatic stress from hearing all those really difficult narratives.
Right. 2 sections. Yeah. Sometimes on Friday, I walk by the window and I see you in there with this small group. Yeah. My group meets on Wednesday mornings, so no one's ever on campus on Wednesday mornings.
Right.
It's a class that is ongoing. In the CFT program, we have our students for 15 months. Right. I had a student in my class for almost 2 years.
Wow.
And so you get to know each individual very well. There's only 6 to 8 students in the class, and the students get to know each other really well, and they support each other. There's lots of crying. There's lots of laughing.
Yes.
And a lot of heroism, as you put it. Yeah.
It's very
so Jungian psychology.
Yes.
I am thoroughly confused by Jungian psychology. It's not as easy to understand as, say, cognitive therapy. Right. And so every time I try to figure it out, I crack a book and I start reading it and I just go, oh, okay, I think I kind of understand. And then I hear something else and I go, I don't get it. So I asked Ann Blake to come on the podcast and explain it once and for all so I can know everything about Jungian psychology. I'll become 100% proficient and knowledgeable. So help me out.
And I'm smiling broadly. So I really think that Jungian analytic psychology is really basic in its nuance. The main thing is individuation. That's the goal. It's not the main thing, it's the main goal. And that means to adaptively appreciate all the parts of oneself. So it's not about changing per se when we become who we really are rather than how we are, because how we are has to do with trauma and what Jung calls complexes, which are the traumas constellated around an emotion, and then we kind of react automatically. I had an example of that yesterday with my family on Christmas Day. And so to accept all that, to appreciate that, to incorporate and integrate all that so that the person is whole, and then from that comes much more easy relating with self and other.
So let me try to reiterate this. So
Sure.
just tell me if I'm wrong. Do not tell me that I got it right unless I got it right.
You can depend on me.
So it's about individuating,
Yes.
meaning that we're not dependent on other people emotionally or
It's
something?
very much like differentiation in the family systems.
I see. Okay, differentiation.
Yeah.
So you're able to give to others while having a choice in the matter.
Yes,
You're able
yes,
to separate
yes.
yourself when needed to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
So you can relate and give and have a lot of love.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can also pull away when you're being harmed by other people.
And it starts with self. So there's the nuance there. So I have to accept all parts of myself so that I'm not projecting myself onto others. Now, projection never stops. So projection means that something either irritates me in somebody else or I admire something in somebody else. And it's actually about me.
Okay.
But because it's unconscious, the way it becomes conscious, I project it out there. And then if I have enough consciousness, I realize, oh, when I have too much affect, either irritated or admiring, then I realize, oh, that's me.
I see.
And then I own that as another part of integrating myself.
And that's potentially related to a complex or always related to a complex?
Well, the alwaysnesses are hard,
Yeah.
but I would say often, if not always. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Absolutely, yes.
So the complex as it relates to early childhood relationships and...
Or trauma. So trauma can be all parts of our life, all duration of our life.
a trauma that happens during our
Yeah.
adult years.
Yeah.
But some kind of difficult major event,
Yeah.
relational event,
Yeah.
or ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
And that produces a complex
Yes.
in which when we are in a similar situation or something that triggers the complex, it engages that. And then
Engages that automatic response.
I see. And we have increased affect, as you say.
Yes.
Overly angry,
Yes.
overly judgmental.
Yes.
That kind of
Overly scared.
thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we flee, fight, or freeze.
Right. Okay. So that is a major part of Jungian analytical psychology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If Carl Jung were here, would he
If
go?
only.
Would he go? What are you talking about? Because sometimes I think, because what you just said to me makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
When I read Jung,
Yeah.
it doesn't always make a ton of sense to me. So sometimes I think Jungian psychologists or Jungian therapists have evolved over the years.
Absolutely,
okay.
absolutely. And Carl Jung was making it up as he went along. So he and Freud became acquaintances, and Freud was Jung's mentor for a while, until 1913 when they had a break in their relationship. And if you've seen the movie A Dangerous Method, I went with a bunch of my Jungian colleagues. We have an organization called the Jungian Psychotherapists Association, and we've been meeting for 20 years, so we're very close friends, is similar to what you say about the case consultation students. And so a bunch of us went together. And one of my friends, who's got a great sense of humor, as we walked out, she said, well, I guess we're all going to become Rogerians. Because to ally ourselves with that kind of movie was very difficult. So it was a difficult movie for me to watch.
Was it inaccurate based on what you know about the history of his life during that time?
What everybody knows is that he had affairs, and that he had very intense affairs, and that he had one with this client and several other clients. And those clients, some of them became colleagues, as Sabina Spielrein did. Tony Wolfe was another one who he had I think, ongoing affair with forever. The thing for me about Jung was he was a human being first and foremost, for me. And that he tried to bring consciousness to what he did. The Red Book, the Liber Novus, was just published, I think in 2000 or 2001. And this is his journal that he started in 1913, around the time that he split with Freud, and went into his unconscious and his dream life and drew incredible pictures. I had no idea. He was such an artist, such a good artist. And some of the images that I've seen over time actually came out of the Red Book. I didn't realize they were his. And he sunk into his consciousness to the depths. I don't think he had a psychotic break. I think he was just stripped of all those usual social things that keep us functioning. So I come from Minnesota, and the phrase is, if you can't say something nice, don't say something at all. Don't say anything at all. And that was not true for Jung, that he was as much himself as he could possibly be. And he stripped his consciousness and his soul and his ego bare.
For how long was he in that state?
I'm reading it now in a study group, and so I'm trying to imagine that last. He makes a last entry quite late in his life, but the intensity of it, I think, I'm going to say 10 years. I don't know for sure if that's right. Okay. But it was a moderately long time. And it's fascinating to read. Absolutely fascinating.
It's a beautiful book. Mm-hmm. You dedicated one to Antioch.
I am a student.
It's in the library at Antioch, and it's there for everyone to look at.
It's on the podium. It's sitting out in the middle.
It's a big, ironically, it's a blue book. Just joking. It's actually red. It's a big red book, and it has, I guess, pictures, photographs.
His paintings.
Of his paintings and his writings, his handwriting.
So they photographed the entire Red Book, and then they translated into a variety of languages.
Right.
Of course, we only have the English there. Right. But those are his actual drawings and paintings.
So this is one of those confusing aspects of Jungian people to me, that you would have a book that seems to be, when I look at it, confusing, personal, not meant to be read by people.
Right.
So it inspires you to think about yourself.
Absolutely.
Meaning of life, relationships.
And especially the nature of human beings and our progress, our development.
So looking at yourself, it involves a lot of looking at yourself.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at yourself, how you react to things, your own complexes.
Yeah.
How you can shed certain things that you want to shed.
Incorporate, so accept. There's not much shedding.
Okay.
So it's incorporating that I have the potential for doing everything that anybody else has ever done. Mm-hmm. And because of my consciousness and working hard on myself, I don't do some of those really egregious, heinous things. Yeah. But I still do some things that I wish I didn't. I mouth off at times.
Yeah.
You'll hear me muttering up and down the halls at Antioch.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been there, at least close to ground zero with you at times a few years ago. I remember there was some stressful times. Yeah. So tell me if this is right. So you are looking at Jung's writings and you're thinking, wow, look at what he's doing. He's really digging deep. He's really looking at himself. He's asking the tough questions. He's starting to somewhat lose his mind in the depths. Yeah. What can I do to look at myself, to connect with life, to connect with myself? How can we do this together? Let me share this with you. Is that what the study group is like?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And analysis is non-hierarchical. So it's not as though the analyst or the clinician, because I'm not an analyst, it's not as though the clinician is the expert. The clinician knows a lot of things. The clinician has done a lot of work on one's own life. Like I said, I've been in analysis now for 21 years and was in therapy before that. And then when I sit with clients, and this is what I ask my students to attempt when they take advanced theories Jungian at Antioch, is to notice what goes on in our entire being. So when I get images, a word will come. I don't give any clinical examples, and if I think of one for myself, I'll do that. Or I'll have a response in my body somewhere. So I might have a little bit of an ache in my neck or my back, and when I say to clients and when I see students do that, it's so close to 100%. They'll say, I try to keep myself out of it because otherwise clients will get distracted by me. I'll say, what's going on in your neck or what's happening in your back? Or are you feeling some tension in your torso? Like 99 times out of 100, they'll say, yeah. yeah, that's really going on for me. So it's that energetic response back and forth that is about settling into myself enough that I can be a barometer. And then when something comes up for me, I always say, okay, how much of this is mine? There's a marvelous graphic that one of the students called a British flag. So it's a rectangle that goes sideways and then a line horizontally. I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I have to really concentrate. Horizontally, which divides the consciousness and the unconsciousness. And then the therapist is on one up-down axis, and the client is on the other vertical axis. And then the lines that go diagonally between the corners are what make it the British flag. And so the therapist is monitoring all of those vectors. So there's a line across for the conscious relationship between the two people. There's a line at the bottom that's the unconscious relationship, which is out of our awareness until something happens. And most importantly for me is the vertical line that goes between my consciousness and my unconsciousness, that I'm looking for cues there that are certainly mine, but we are so similar as human beings that when things come, I can filter what's mine and then wonder aloud about, are you feeling sad? It looks like to me you're feeling sad, or you look sad.
It's very similar to how I think as a psychodynamic systems therapist.
Yes.
Intersubjectivity.
That's exactly the word, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So would Carl Jung have said those words or along those lines?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he said a couple things that I very much appreciate. One is that he did therapy X for client X. So his analytic psychology is, for me, more a philosophy than a bunch of techniques. I mean, there are some techniques, but not as techniquey as many of the other therapies.
Right.
And so it's mostly about being present, having contact with our own unconscious so we can put that into the mix. And then he also said that if both people don't change, if the clinician and the client, if one or the other doesn't change, the therapy is not happening. And the analyst stays in the analytic position.
Yeah.
So it's not an informed friendship.
Right.
But both people change.
I want to get back to the movie for a second.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about some other things after that.
Yeah.
In the movie, the timeline is when Carl Jung is still a quote-unquote pupil of Freud, an underling associate, so to speak.
Yes.
And he is starting to work with patients.
Yeah.
And he has he's married with children.
Yes.
And he has a patient played by Keira Knightley.
Yes.
Her name was
Sabina Spielrein.
Sabina Spielrein.
Spielrein. Mm-hmm.
And she comes to the hospital because she was traumatized.
Yeah.
Sexually abused, probably.
I think so.
She seemingly has a fetish for being hurt during
Yeah.
sex.
Yeah.
In order
Yeah.
for her to have sexual pleasure, she needs to be hurt somehow physically or controlled. And she and Carl Jung enter into analysis or treatment of some sort, and then Carl Jung starts to have an affair with her.
That's right.
Well, prior to that, he starts to involve her as a colleague. He starts to help to train her because she wants to become an analyst herself. And then he starts to have an affair with her, and he starts to have sex with her in the way that she wants to have sex by hitting her and this sort of thing. And then Sabina starts to develop her own theories, and Carl Jung encourages her to do that. Yeah. And then there's the break from Freud because Freud was very paternalistic and very controlling, and he wanted everyone to do exactly as he said, not as he did, incidentally. Yep. And then Sabina and Carl Jung end up breaking up to some extent. But this goes on over several years. Yeah. Yeah. And the history of this story is potentially accurate?
Certainly the external facts of it are. Oh. The actual relationship and what happened between them, I mean, that's not chronicled anywhere. Yeah. The degree to which that happened, I don't know. I mean, it happened in a closed room.
Back then, there were no ethical standards.
They were the first people.
Yeah. When I watched it, I thought, oh, interesting. You know, I have a better understanding of one person's view of Jung's life. But when you watched it with your friends that are all, I don't know, Jungian people, you said, ugh, that was awful to watch.
Now, I said, ugh.
Oh.
Not everybody said, ugh.
Oh.
But for me, I start getting a little twitchy, as you can see in the room, as we talk about this. My experience as an analysand, and my experience as a clinician is clients come to us wanting help. I come to my analyst wanting help. And then we also do this trance stuff of trying to make it so that I don't have to change and I can get my analyst to collude with me in saying, yeah, that is the way it is, or to treat me the way I'm used to being treated. That's what I saw in the movie, is that he got caught up in his own vulnerability as a human being.
And went along with the dysfunction, shall we say.
That's what I think, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Well, aren't we all guilty of smaller versions of that at times, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And again,
absolutely.
The field was not developed at the time.
Right.
They had no one's experience to learn from.
Right. And Jung was, and Freud was the opposite of that. There was a nice little Jungian slip I did there. So Freud was the opposite of that.
What's a Jungian slip? Is that a thing?
It's more personal to me.
Oh, okay.
It's one of my many jokes that I amuse myself with. But Freud was the direct opposite. So at the beginning of the film, Jung was sitting behind Sabine Spielrein.
Yeah.
And she was very nervous about that, which I can imagine that being true.
Yeah.
So Freud would sit behind the client, the patient would be on a sofa. So he was very much hands-off and even no eye contact, and very little even verbal contact. So Freud went to that extreme, and Jung in some ways went to the opposite extreme. Not only about sexual contact, but just in terms of that more horizontal relationship.
Does being a Jungian person make you automatically hateful of Freud?
Absolutely not. There certainly are camps.
Is it like Team Edward and Team
Carl and Sigmund?
Team Carl and Team Sigmund?
Well, in some respects, yes. For me, not personally. But in this town, we have several analytic organizations. So we have the Jungian North Pacific Institute of Analytical Psychology, which are the analysts, and then they do some training of Jungian analysts. And there's a Freudian group that does training. And I think the object relations people do training. And not too many years ago, they had an inter-institute program. So they got together and sponsored a speaker.
Yeah, I went to a talk by Donnell Stern that was put on by the inner group there.
Yeah. So they've done some of that. So that's sort of new age, really groovy, that we are doing that in this town.
Because in the past, they hated each other with a passion and thought the other ones were idiots and that sort of thing.
Certainly some of the folks did.
Yeah. In Seattle, we're nicer than people in other parts of the country.
Not quite as nice as Minnesotans, but close.
Yeah, close. And therefore more apt to have an inner relationship like that.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some specific ideas.
Sure.
Okay. A lot of people talk about the collective unconscious. There's another sort of unconscious, right? There's like your individual...
Personal unconscious.
So the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, please explain.
So the personal unconscious are those things, I think a lot of times of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of the ice above the water is our consciousness, and the amount of ice below the water is our unconsciousness.
Right.
And so those are things that are about my own wiring. So the archetypes are a little more collective, but that we have things in us that are concepts, that we're born with some concepts as well as some structures. And so the personal unconscious is about me. And so there are things in my life that I have either forgotten or I have not consciously chosen to forget, but they were so painful that they no longer are very available to me. But it's also just stuff like my third grade teacher's name. I don't know that at the moment. That's in my unconscious. I could work hard and find it.
And maybe values that you learned that aren't entirely conscious.
Yeah.
Like you like cake as opposed to
tiramisu or something.
Yeah. That your preferences, values, the way you talk, the way you act, these are all unconsciously, placed.
Yes.
Okay.
When you see parents and little kids, like about 3 or 4, and you see the child posturing like the parent, those are the unconscious things that we learn.
So that's an explanation of conscious versus unconscious.
Yeah.
What about the personal conscious versus the collective
The
unconscious?
collective unconscious, and some of the more spiritual things are the things that Jung definitely added. And he read Eastern philosophy, and so he incorporated some of those things. So the collective unconscious, Jung postulated, was that there's a connection between all of us, among all of us.
So we're all connected spiritually.
Yeah, and energetically.
And as a Jungian person, you believe that.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? Because when I read about it in this book, it talks about it.
Right.
It seems as though it's for lack of a better term, a religious belief.
This is from Corsinian Wedding's book. The collective unconscious they define as a vast hidden psychic resource shared by all human beings. And they are made up of archetypes, which are organizing principles, a system of readiness, a dynamic nucleus of energy, an inherited predisposition to form personality and to view reality according to universal inner patterns. So Jung believes
there is a collective unconscious that is connecting all of us, or that is out there.
that we have universal aspects of our personalities that we share in common.
We have universal aspects of our personalities that we share in common.
So the mother, the father, the guide,
We all have a
shadow.
mother in us. We all have a father in us. We all have a shadow. We all have a self.
Yeah.
We all have a Godhead,
Yeah.
or a relationship with a Godhead or something.
Yeah.
And that things will emerge from that collective,
Yeah. They will unfold.
unfold in the individual.
Yeah.
The collective energy of the mother will unfold within the individual.
Yeah.
What is the therapeutic action regarding the collective unconscious? Isn't it becoming more aware of that, or manifesting it more fully?
Well, it's like an external backdrop that we can relate to that is bigger than ourselves. So like fairy tales are like that, so myths are like that, so that we can elevate things out of the incredibly personal. So yesterday at Christmas, my niece and I got into a small thing. I reacted to something she said, which is a historical thing between the two of us. So taking that to analysis, then we also look at it from a larger picture. Like there might be a fairy tale that has to do with that, then I can learn something from that's not just my relationship with my niece, but it's about larger principles. So it takes the personalization out of it.
Yes, this is one of the common things I hear from Jungian people. So help me understand this. And I think I might be approaching some understanding of it. A common thing I'll hear from Jungian people is, this happened to me yesterday. I had this fight with my family member.
Yeah.
That reminds me of this Celtic fairy tale that has to do with a troll under a bridge, and I'm being serious. I'm trying to come up with some kind of fairy tale.
It might have to do with Persephone and Demeter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this discussion, or this personal awareness of this fairy tale or myth or story that existed long ago, or movie that is out right now, helps one to cope, or helps one to what?
To get some objective distance, so that I'm not the first person in the world who's ever had this experience. Okay. This is just a human experience.
So it normalizes it to some extent?
It normalizes it, and it objectifies it. So that I'll just tell you a tiny bit about my psychology, and that is that I take things much too seriously and critically for myself. So it's like, oh my God, I did it again, rather than people have done this for millennia. Yeah. I'm just another human being who got caught in something. Right. And I'm not happy when I disturb somebody else. I'm never glad that I've done that, and I wish I didn't do that.
Is the idea that some other human wrote a story, a myth, a fairy tale, a story about something that is very similar to what I am experiencing right now? It's not the myth. The myth isn't real. Yeah. It's the story that manifested the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Some guy 5,000 years ago wrote a story, and he was experiencing something, a universal human nature thing, and it manifested in this myth. And I can learn about that myth and recall that myth as I experience a very similar thing now. Yeah. And by recalling that myth that someone wrote a long time ago, it helps me to normalize it and understand that it's
It's just being human.
It's just being human.
Yeah. And I'm not the only one to do this. And it isn't all that different, except it's more flowery language in the myths and fairy tales. It's not that much different than theory. So psychological theorists say this is how we understand human behavior.
Right.
And then when you and I work with clients, we can step back from what's happening right here in the room and think, okay, I'm connected with this client and I'm thinking about this.
Right.
So that it provides some kind of a map.
Because I think part of the confusion for me, previous to this conversation, and I'm still holding out for the possibility that I'm still confused about this, is that
join the club.
Is that the myths were regarded by Jungians as truth, as the myth actually happened or something along those lines. Oh.
No. It's that these are concepts that are helpful to us to understand ourselves. That it's not that myths or fairy tales are real.
Because sometimes I think Jungian people forget that, maybe. Because when I talk to some Jungian people, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about, they will say things as if the myth happened. And I'm thinking, you realize that's a myth, right? Like they'll say, well, that's the Zeus in you, and I'll be like, Zeus doesn't exist, but maybe I'm just mistaking it, and maybe they're just saying, well, that's there's that long string of events where that's the Zeus in you, but some guy or culture made up Zeus to represent this universal truth about human nature, and that's the Zeus in you that was similar to the Greeks back then.
Right. So that's the shorthand version of that's the part of you that's warrior or eats his children or whatever they're referring to in you, and I've got a big smile on my face as I look at you. But it is giving some kind of personification to the templates that are universal in human behavior.
I think Jungians need to change their language when they're speaking to non-Jungians, because I think a lot of people run away from Jungians when they say stuff like that, because they think, what are you nuts? Like,
well, most of us are.
You realize that Mars didn't exist, right?
I agree that we all have jargon and we shouldn't use jargon with each other, and it's such a convenient shortcut.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. Well, I can get behind that. I can get behind that for sure. So, dreams.
What I'd like to do before dreams is to actually talk about the shadow, which is part of the archetypes. So the shadow, those things, those aspects in others and in the world where we give too much credence to or we get too annoyed by. And those places are things that I don't like about myself or I am unwilling to acknowledge about myself, the positive aspects. And those places that are in our unconscious are the parts that are very useful for us to bring forward. So we call it reclaiming the shadow. There's that place in us that demonizes the other or idealizes the other. And that is not a useful thing for us to do. So I have the capacity to do all those things. Luckily, I didn't have enough trauma in my history that I act out in those really devious and deviant ways. But I do plenty of other things. But that aspect of acknowledging that part of us, I think, is really important. And that some therapies, and I'm not disparaging those therapies, but some therapies try to shape our behavior and narrow our behavior rather than call all the team members equal partners.
So one might work with a client and explore that part of them that wants to hurt other people, wants to be hostile, wants to protect themselves, or wants to be mean or run away, not give, be selfish, and that we shouldn't shun that part or reject that part or deny that part, but to accept the shadow. And that was a big idea of Carl Jung's. Okay.
So I'm going to give you a little example. This was like the best moment in my life.
Wow.
I know. So I mentioned this niece. I have one niece and one nephew. The rest of us didn't have any children. So there's a lot going for these kids, a lot riding on these kids.
Yeah.
My sister and I took my niece to see New Kids on the Block. And she was maybe 7, maybe 8. I was either still in grad school or just out of grad school, didn't have a lot of money. So I bought $25 tickets, which was a lot for me. $75 was a lot of money in those days. Yeah. And it was in the Tacoma Dome. And we were up way, way near the ceiling, and nobody else was around us. No one else had bought those tickets. And in fact, we were so far away and my niece was still young. She didn't realize that the opening band, which she thought was the new kids, she couldn't see them. They were African American. We were so far away that she couldn't tell.
Oh, wow.
She got into a snit and walked down to, there was a balcony banister right there, and she was down there kind of huffing and puffing, and my sister was getting impatient with her. Your auntie spent good money on this, and, this is a big deal, and so shape up. She was having none of that. And so finally, I got myself together, and I went down, and I put my arms around her from the back and said, "You must be so disappointed." And she began to sob. Mm. So the seeing under the behavior and not getting distracted by my irritation at her behavior. Because I could have gone there for a long time and said, ungrateful and but to really see her disappointment in my disappointment. So I was disappointed that she was not having a good time, and to relate to that and give to her.
So that's an example of accepting the shadow?
Because I could have gotten as irritated as my sister.
Because you weren't acknowledging your shadow.
Right.
And it would have therefore run the show.
Right.
So by acknowledging it, you can dispel it to some extent.
Right. To accept it, to say, well, that's a part of me. I'm irritated.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. Oh, I'm disappointed. Maybe she's disappointed.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to look under, rather than staying with that, either that negative or that idealizing affect, to go under it and be curious about that.
Right. Because at first glance, one might say, well, to acknowledge and accept one's shadow would be to act in a hostile manner or in a mean way. But you're saying by accepting it, it can help, it can do the opposite.
Right. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
So then I don't have to act out of it because I've accepted it. And I think of it like a little league team. So sometimes people get so invested in winning that the kids who aren't doing well get shunned off to the side and don't get to play the game, rather than a really good coach who says everybody has talent and everybody has a contribution here, so let's figure out how we can contribute.
Yeah.
That's accepting everybody, rather than saying I'm only paying attention to the kids who do well. I'm only paying attention to the parts of me that I like, the parts that are kind and funny and warm. Okay. I'm just paying attention to that.
Okay.
And when I don't pay attention to the other parts of myself, they get louder.
Right.
That's where people act out.
Yeah. So the psychodynamic part of me of accepting the parts of yourself, not denying, because when we deny, that's when it gains more power.
Absolutely.
How about dreams? Do you want to talk about dreams? Okay.
So Freud mostly talked about dreams as wish fulfillments. And he spent a lot of energy focusing on aggression and sexuality. Yeah. For Jung, it's more about the unconscious being what's called compensatory. So the unconscious says, here's some things that you're not paying attention to, and I'm going to put them, I'll try to put them in kind of a metaphor or a story format so that you can connect with it. Because if I could have connected it with my consciousness, I already would have. So if it gives me information that's too direct, like we do as therapists, we don't go, well, here's the deal about you. Yeah. And shape up. So we soften it some, we soften our lens, we soften our voice, we soften our face, and we offer feedback that is sometimes confrontive, but not in a aggressive confrontation, but this is what I notice. So my unconscious is saying, this is what I notice, and offering it to me in an attempt to present it in a way that I can accept it.
With the assumption that I believe that some of our dreams are efforts to provide homeostasis, balance, health.
Exactly.
And so the unconscious is saying, hey, you're not paying attention to X. And therefore you're off balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Jung talked about one-sidedness as not being very useful.
Okay.
And that all the characters, it's kind of like Gestalt Theory, that all the characters in the dream are actually me. Mm-hmm. The inanimate and the animate characters are me. Parts
of the self.
Yeah. So as I hear a dream, I can think, well, maybe that's connected to this theme, this motif for that person. But much more so, I think, in Jungian psychotherapy, the person who knows the dream is the dreamer. Yeah. And so the clinician offers, first of all, listens with an I don't know stance. Yeah. Because, and when clients tell dreams, I'm beginning to do some thinking, which is not a good idea. I should just be there present. things will strike me, and so I pay attention to that. But as we work with people with any kind of content, but especially dreams, there'll be that aha moment, or not. I mean, maybe we haven't gotten to it, but something will gel for the client. And now that makes sense to them. And then we know that, okay, something has happened for the dream. And irrespective of what ideas I have or interpretations I have, if it doesn't click for the client, either it's not true, or maybe the client isn't quite ready to see it yet.
Right. There would be no way to know until they confirm either way.
Yes.
Traditional dream analysis was top down. Therapists would say, here's what your dream means. And there's those ridiculous books that say, if you dream about flying, it means that you want to be free, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's cookbook approach.
Maybe I should do another podcast about dream analysis, but in general, the way I approach it, and I actually will have this as a ongoing theme in my family of origin class. I'll ask people to present dreams.
Great.
And I quote unquote analyze them in class. So the student talks about the dream, or the client talks about the dream, and I say, and then I'll get more details, because a lot of times when people recall dreams, they tell a very short version of it, and then when you start asking them, well, actually, I felt a little this way, or I guess it was hot out. And I do kind of remember, and I'll say, well, how did you feel in this moment? Well, I don't know, because it's not always apparent. It's like, oh, I dreamt about my arm fell off, and then I was how did you feel when your arm fell off? Well, I was curious, but I strangely wasn't afraid.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay. So you're curious, but not afraid. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I just start asking more questions, and then I start to ask them about associations. Well, what does arm falling off mean to you? Did you see something recently?
That's good Jungian work.
Okay. So well, I call it psychodynamic work. And
it's in the same corner.
Yeah. And then start exploring those associations, and it's all based on what they say. And if they say, I don't know, I don't have any associations with that, okay, and just move on. And then usually what happens is people will say, oh my God, this totally relates to this blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And then they're like, wow, you're really good at analyzing dreams. And I think, I didn't do any of it.
Yeah.
I just asked a bunch of questions. I'm just curious, and you made these associations.
The curiosity, and you brought your presence to it,
Yeah.
and you held them, and I call what my clinical consultant does, I call it shepherding. So he's not shaping me. He doesn't have a preconceived notion.
Yeah.
But he notices things, and he says, how about going in that direction?
Right. And I would never say, wow, you dreamt about an arm falling off. Do you think that has anything to do with power?
Yeah.
I mean, the instant I say that to someone is the instant that I impose this thing inside their brain, and my power relationship with them plays into it.
Absolutely.
And now they're like, maybe it does mean power.
Yeah.
But
then you can see they're in their head. You just went into your head.
Yeah.
And that's not where the dream comes from.
Right. And often dream analysis is associated with this action of a expert saying, it sounds like it means power. And I'll see a lot of, and I've seen some presentations of art therapy where they'll say, ooh, a spiral, well, that means blank. And they'll tell that to the client. And I think, how do you know what a spiral means to this person? That is an abuse of power, and you can tell it gets me angry.
Right. And so the collective unconscious is that part that says, okay, here's some templates that probably mean this. But the personal unconscious is where the individual says, this is what it means to me. Yeah. And there's some connection between the two. It's not as though your thinking is completely off base. It's just that it has to come first from the person.
Yeah.
And then we come to thinking. When I do case consultation class, which is the class that accompanies students' internship, when students present their case presentation, they talk about the genogram of the client and sometimes their own. And then we'll read the packet. And the first thing I say is, okay, let's go around and what is your affective response? Meaning, what are your feelings? What are your images? What happened in your body? If we go away from those, we'll never get back to it. Once we go to our heads, we can't get back. So that part of your doing the affective work is right on. And
that affective body awareness work with as a intern is presenting their client and the other interns and yourself, you reflect at first, what am I feeling? What's in my body? That might be a reflection of what the client is experiencing or what the intern is experiencing while they're with the client. And that's very informative.
And again, it's uncanny.
Yeah.
We pick up stuff as human beings, and that's incredibly valuable. It is that non-provable empiricism.
Yeah.
And it's really valuable.
All right. Dreams. Well, cross that off the list. Well, let's get to typology.
Sure.
So Jung was interested in typology of personality.
Yeah.
And tried to come up with different spectra to describe people. Say, was extrovert, introvert his as well?
Yes.
Myers-Briggs is based on...
Yep.
Carl.
Singer-Loomis is another one.
Okay.
In terms of typology, the job of a theorist is to make sense of things and to make frameworks for things. And again, it comes from their own personality, their own family of origin, that this is how I see the world. Doesn't mean it's right, but it does give us something to hang our hats on. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of definitions, extroversion is preferring to focus on the outer world of people or things. And the opposite of that is introversion, which is prefer to focus on the inner world of ideas and impressions. And so thinking and feeling are opposite. So thinking is tending to base decisions on logic and on objective analysis. And feeling is, again, a deciding. It's not so much emotion. It's a deciding to base decisions primarily on values and on subjective evaluation of person-centered concerns. So let me give you an example of that. So I'm feeling more than thinking, and I went out to buy a car years ago, and a friend of mine said, okay, let's look in Consumer Report, and I want you to really think about what you want and not just take something that you like. So other friend of mine came with me, and we went to Toyota, and we went to Subaru, and we went to Honda, and I drove a couple of cars.
Honda, yeah.
Exactly. And so when I got to Honda, the Accord was too big, and the, what's the other one?
Civic
was a little too small. And then I glanced over, and there was a red Del Sol. And I said, that's my car. So I had done enough thinking with the left side of my brain to say, okay, I want a foreign car. I want a Dependable, yes. I'd had an Isuzu. I didn't want another Isuzu. I wanted a good, strong car with a good recommendation. And I recognized what I want rather than completely made it with my conceptual basis. That's the feeling. So on values and on preferences that have to do with subjectivity rather than as much with objectivity.
There was no objective difference or preference for the Del Sol over the Accord or the Civic. It was more of a subjective preference based on values. Is that what you're saying? Like a feeling you got?
On attraction.
On attraction to the Del Sol.
So not just
it's not like out of control, illogical.
No.
But
it can be. So there's a continuum.
Okay.
And so some people are way down at either end of the continuum. And then it is so we can get into analysis paralysis and never make a decision because it's always like, well, I don't have enough data.
Right.
Or on the other end of the continuum into feeling that it's only what I like, rather than what makes any sense at all.
And the idea is to be balanced in between these two?
Yeah.
Okay.
So to do enough work with both sides, that then when I see it, it's not just impulse. Because intuition, we're not quite to intuition yet, but intuition and feeling without any thinking or sensing is out of control, as are thinking and sensing without any intuition or feeling. So it's like, again, like handedness, that I need to use both hands, even though my right hand is better at some things.
So when someone on the Myers-Briggs, for instance, scores very high in one direction, then in therapy or with their own personal work, the idea is to bring them to more in between.
Yes.
I see.
So we consolidate into some kind of typology that is our natural temperament if we're left to our own devices. If we have what Rogers calls unconditional positive regard, we blossom like we are made to. Sometimes family will say, no, actually, I don't want you to do that. I want you to do this. So following my own temperament, I will consolidate in my early life so that I can function and make sense of the world and learn things and be independent. And then at about midlife, we often, again, if left to our own devices, do the other side. And so that's that individuation time. Jung talked about people don't really become adults until about 35, and it's probably later now, because we live longer.
Well, so let me get this straight. So based on our personality and based on our experiences, we have a true self or a best case scenario personality, and that society or family will push us potentially away from that. And that's when problems happen. So say on the extroverted introverted spectrum, if someone were, say, moderately more introverted than extroverted, and society wants them to be extroverted because society values extroverted people, they might feel pressure to become more extroverted and therefore become out of balance with themselves.
Yes.
Even though they might be moving toward a more balance between extroversion and introversion.
Right.
So it's not always about necessarily bringing them to the middle of extroversion and introversion.
No.
It's about becoming who is what's best for them.
Right.
But if people are far to one side, that might be a bad thing for them.
And I think it's going to be a difficult road for them. If that's truly what it is, then that's truly what it is. And it'll be harder. Yeah. So there are people who, even on the multiple intelligences, if I only have mechanical intelligence and I don't have any other intelligence, that's going to be hard for me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be really good at what I do.
Yeah.
So that dilettante that is good at several things rather than the expert is kind of that interplay.
I see.
But there are people they just are who they are.
Could you come on the show sometime after testing my co-hosts and talk specifically about their personality as measured by whatever instrument you would like to do, and maybe go back and forth with them about how to interpret it? Because I feel like a lot of these tests, when they are given and read, people walk away from it with a very vague understanding or a misunderstanding of what the instrument is providing to them. And the way you're talking about it, I think, is much more nuanced and interesting.
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you my other favorite joke.
Okay.
And that is, it has to do with typology in a way. When I was saying that we all have our constructs, so we lay them out on other people. And so when I go to parties, and I don't very often because I'm an introvert, and I talk to a person who I don't know, which I don't do very often because I'm uncomfortable with that. But at some point, because I'm a woman, they'll finally get around to ask me what I do for work, if I work. And I say, well, I'm a psychologist. And the person will say, oh, I better stop talking about myself then. And I say, too late. Because we all make judgments all the time.
Right. Yeah, I run into that exact same thing. In fact, if I'm in a situation where I don't think it's going to matter, I won't tell them what I make something up. I'll say, I work at Microsoft. Any last words about this?
So the last word I have is that I just recently went to a high school reunion this summer, and at one quite some time ago, somebody said to me, wow, you've really changed. And the sense I made out of that is because I've been in therapy, I'm more who I am. And I wasn't. I was very careful.
So it's really helped you, and people notice right away that you've changed over the years.
Yeah.
Well, that must feel good.
Feels great.
It's all been worth it.
I was going to say, all that money and time invested, I got something out of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Ann.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
I really feel like I've learned a lot.
Cool.
I feel much less confused, honestly.
Good.
What I've learned personally is that Jungians aren't very much different from me.
No.
It's just sometimes the language throws me off a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you integrate systems and family of origin speak and philosophy into it, it's very similar to me.
And I think Jung was actually the forerunner of many of the theorists.
Yeah.
He doesn't get credited. Like when I would read the family of origin textbook, I was like, this is Jungian.
Really?
There's no mention of Jung.
Yeah. Adler's another one. Sullivan doesn't.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for another episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us, and please take care of yourself.